afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Steel Carrier, and I'm a customer advocate here at Qordoba, helping connect our customers with strings management solutions to improve their UX. I'm happy to say that today our presenter is May Habib, who is one of our co-founders and head of product who works closely with our customers every day and has some great insights and best practices to share from those customers with you today. Before we get started, I want to make sure that all of you know that you guys are all on mute, but you're all welcome to submit questions using the Q&A tab on Zoom. But please note that other attendees can see what you're asking, so if you'd prefer to use the chat box to submit a question directly to us, you can do that as well. We'll answer your questions at a couple different points during the webinar, so feel free to submit them at any time. So without further ado, here's May Habib with Words Matter, Better UX with Strings Management.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to dive in. We've got some incredibly astute product content managers on the line and otherwise friends of UX on the phone. So excited for the discussion part of our conversation today. From an agenda perspective, we wanted to really cover what is centrally managing your strings all about, why would you want to do it, what are the benefits of doing it, and what are the use cases that our pretty innovative customer base is doing now that they've got this single source of truth for all of the copy across their product platforms. So that really is the agenda for today, and we're going to dive into a demo of strings management and what folks are doing inside of the platform. So to level set with everybody, strings management, what is it? Some folks have got databases internally that mimic some of the benefits of strings management. Your strings management could actually be a Google Sheet. Whether you've got a platform or not to manage strings management, you are certainly already strings managing. And what we mean when we say strings management is the ability to have a single source of truth for all of the copy that your users interact with across your product. So this can be user interface, it can be notifications, it can be microcopy, it can be onboarding flows, everything that exists within your application UI that sits within the code. And strings management is the ability to really manage all of that copy from a single source. Customers who care about the user experience, so this is a survey that Forrester did, folks who say that they prioritize user experience above all else in product development. What kind of returns do they have from a business perspective on that investment in UX? And copy and UI, as we covered in the last webinar, are certainly the most impactful part of that UX. The customers who did respond that user experience is a top priority of product development showed that their business results really outpaced everybody. So that is the fact that they acquire more users, those users are acquired more cheaply, they stay longer, they spend more, the company grows faster. So all good things. If you are responsible for product content strategy, you can pat yourself on the back that you absolutely are having a big impact on the top line of the business as well as the bottom line. So we certainly believe that there are very strong business outcomes to having product content strategists on the team and managing copy in a strategic way. Now, why is it so difficult to do this in software? And why are we on the phone today? And why are folks increasingly finding the need for a strings management solution? Our customers are really solving for three problems that exist today more so than they ever have. The first is that there's no single source of truth in product content. What do we mean by this? When you look at just three pretty simple screen grabs of a customer's application, there are actually a number of microservices at work here. There is a feature for keyless door entry, which is actually a separate team. There are two different loyalty programs. There's a notification system, there's interface, and increasingly that's sitting in a backend that is microservices oriented. Microservices are even breaking out even further into functional services. And the engineers are deploying multiple times a day. And these are, this is one customer, but it really looks like everybody that we talk to. When you go from monolithic applications to microservices-oriented applications, 2 deployments a year to 2 deployments an afternoon, it really stresses the product content strategy, and not having a single source of truth becomes quite difficult, and it really impacts the user experience. The second problem here is that the developer is the bottleneck. So because this product content sits in the back end, it's really the engineer who's the arbiter of that string, of that almighty string. And engineers like to say that strings are where data goes to die, and we couldn't agree more. And that's part of what needs to be fixed. And what the engineer as the bottleneck means is that change is a lot harder than it would be on your website or for a marketing use case where you do have a CMS. There's no CMS in product. The third problem is that scaling becomes difficult. What we have been able to do on the marketing side for decades in terms of segmentation and personalization is very hard to do in software. It's only ever been one build, one version of your application. Scaling could mean personalization, scaling could mean internationalization. It is quite difficult without a single source of truth for all of the content. It is really difficult to scale across platform without losing the coherence and consistency of the user experience. So we've got folks on the phone who are having to audit more content being written in more places, going to more places, authored by more engineers and more people. So that is really the problem that we're solving here with strings management. Qordoba allows you to very quickly suck up all of the strings, no matter where they sit, no matter what platforms they sit in, what frameworks are being used to produce them by your engineers. And by doing so, allows you to centrally manage them in a coherent way. And we covered I think the last webinar was about how we centrally manage strings using a GitHub integration. We also cover Bitbucket, we cover GitLab, and those are going to be topics of future webinars. So we're not going to talk about how we actually do this and the integration magic that happens here that allows you as a PM to make one change in Qordoba and have it go to repos of all sorts of technologies. But those are very important questions, certainly, and we'll see in the Q&A period what kinds of questions come up on integration, so we can definitely plan future webinar topics around that. So what centrally managing strings allows you to do is quite important. We covered single source of truth. So being able to, in one place, search across all of the strings that could sit in dozens and dozens of GitHub repositories. We've got customers who are actually pretty varied in terms of how their teams are organized, and so pull strings from SVN, pull strings from GitHub, pull strings from Bitbucket, and so being able to really manage that in one place and have it be integrated is super important. Knowing who it was that may have authored a key, who it was that may have edited a key, being able to create workflows around those copy approvals that include UX, that may include marketing, may include legal. We definitely see a lot of marketing and PR and comms involvement in finalizing some of this copy a lot more than we used to before. Product is really becoming increasingly the channel for how customers, both tech and non-tech, are acquiring users, and so that just makes the product very important to non-product team members as well. Content scoring, which we're going to cover in a different webinar on the ability to really use Qordoba's emotion, brand, and tone analysis. We'll cover style, spelling, and grammar, and we'll definitely show that in the demo. But going through the deep tech of why that's important and how that's possible is going to be a future webinar. And then the integration ecosystem is some of the stuff that we've been talking about to date. how to set it up so that your engineers don't have to do very much work, and in a couple clicks, you've hooked up a GitHub or Bitbucket repository to Qordoba, and you've got the ability to add strings and edit strings, add keys, and edit keys via Qordoba, and have that get sent back to your application. So those are very important benefits of having strings management. I'm going to talk about this just very briefly, the ability for us to really take content out of software, no matter where it sits, and send it back natively. So Qordoba works as part of the build. It's not runtime. Those might be important questions that your engineers may ask you. And so what that means is, in terms of strings, your end user is interacting with copy that sits inside of your application. Qordoba is not intermediating that when your users open up a application or log into your app online. And so that's very important for the engineers in our customer portfolio. Now, this is not the subject of this webinar, but we have had it come up often in Q&A, so definitely want to talk about it quickly, and very happy to do deep dives for folks on the phone afterwards who are interested in this. But we definitely get a lot of questions around, does Qordoba still help me manage my strings, even if they're hard-coded in the application? And the answer to that is yes. And the way that we do it is via a tool called Qordoba Extract, which runs locally on your developers' machines and helps them tokenize strings that are hard-coded. We've got customers who actually build Qordoba Extract into their Jenkins servers, which basically means that every time the application is built, they check to make sure that nobody has hard-coded strings, which is great for a best practices check. So lots of different ways to use Qordoba Extract, even if the vast majority of your strings are perfectly tokenized. And the way that Qordoba Extract works, very secure and developer friendly. It is runs through the command line. It's a small model that gets downloaded by the engineer locally. Qordoba scans through the code that might contain hard-coded strings. We surface those strings, those potential strings, with suggestions for what the key could be and should be. We use some pretty cool NLP and machine learning to generate those keys. And then the engineer can go through and decide what of our findings they want to actually replace. And then a third and final command does the replacing for them. So that is how that works. And that's run locally, which means Qordoba is never reading source code. And it's a model that does improve with time. And so we definitely have a number of customers who have included this tool in their build. You can check it out on GitHub. And if there are folks on the phone whose engineering teams would be interested to learn more, I'm very happy to set that up. Cool. So any questions so far? No? Okay, cool. So we're going to dive into a demo very soon. Just want to outline for everybody what you guys are going to see. So an interface that allows you to edit keys, create personas, and really write UI via workflows that integrate UX, that integrate PMs, that don't involve engineering, but go straight to the heart of the engineering workflow in a very engineering-friendly way. We're going to talk about how content is measured and scored, and how Qordoba gives you the ability to really improve that content and content suggestions as that content is pulled in. And just as a brief overview of kind of where we are in our own ecosystem, we're right now going to be covering just number one and a bit of number two, segmentation and personalization. You guys will see that today. Happy to take questions on it, but we'll cover personas and how to create personas in Qordoba on a future webinar. And then same with localization. So today we're going to cover number one, really around strings management for product UX, how to get product content quality up, cross-app consistency, and how string updates are made. So that is what we're going to do in just a sec. I'm going to pause for just a second while I go into the browser. Hold on one second. Okay, and we are back. Awesome. Okay, so what am I looking at here? Let me start at the very beginning. So I set up a workspace that I tied to my GitHub repository where my mobile strings sit. So I had selected here a GitHub community repo. I'm going to do that just for fun. Actually, I want some other suggestions to come up here, so I'm going to do this for a minute. I created a workspace name, and so let's call this, just for example, demo application. And the workflow that I selected here was a strings management workflow. And so that really gets me the kinds of steps that most folks who are using Qordoba for strings management need. So that's a string creation step, it's a copy editing step, and it is a commitment step to the repos or underlying software application. So we can go back and talk about how we got here at the end, but that is what I did. And once I did that, I was able to pull in the resource file that contained some of the strings that are in my application. I will show you how you'll be able to add strings and keys in Qordoba in just a second. But for most customers, when we first engage, there are already strings that exist. A few folks are starting completely from scratch, and so there is something that gets pulled in when we connect to that GitHub repository. And I'm working in a project that has two personas, folks who are in my loyalty club and folks who are not in my loyalty club. And we'll also talk a little bit about how those personas are created and managed. So I'm going to go into my strings file, and I can see that I've got two workflow steps here, a string creation step and a copy approval step, which is important. My team is just me, so I'm pretty lonely, but I can definitely add folks, and I can show you guys how to do that. So if I wanted to get a quick snapshot of my keys, I could definitely do that. If I wanted to get a quick snapshot of just how the content that's already been written matches up against a style guide, and style guides are going to be covered in a different webinar, I can do that. What I want to do today is really think about how I adjust copy and how I adjust my strings for folks who are in the loyalty club versus folks who are not. So as I read this, I can see that and I'm going to actually keep the keys open so you guys can see exactly what it is that I'm doing. And remember, because I have tied to a GitHub repo, when content here gets completed, i.e. strings are created and copy is approved, I'm actually doing commits to a GitHub repository that backs this project. So I'm going to take a look here, and I'm going to think about the fact that I want to adjust the copy for folks who are not in the loyalty club. So I have a pretty good one right here. So loyalty is paid off and we've upgraded your stay. Now, if a person who's not in the loyalty club gets upgraded, then I'm not going to want to reference that it was because of their loyalty. So what I'm going to do is for this key, I'm going to switch over to non-loyalty club. And I can't remember what I called it, loyalty, let's see here. Okay, there we are. And I'm going to say, you know, I don't actually, it's not going to be about loyalty. Let's see, your, your upgraded your stay. Okay, so we're going to say we value your business and we've upgraded your stay. So certainly not as warm as I talk to my loyalty club members, but it is going to have to do. And so oops, I definitely spelled that wrong. Value your business and we've upgraded your stay. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go back. Let me go back to read loyalty club members. Anything else that I'm going to want to edit for folks who are not. In our experience, when folks are personalizing by segment, we see anywhere from 1/3 to 50% of strings get changed. Certainly interface tends to stay very similar, but even tone can change. The information itself changes. And this really makes it easy for engineers. It doesn't involve any logic on their end, but the interface definitely feels a lot warmer. So here's another one here. As a gold or platinum elite, you can select a later checkout time. Now this key showing up for folks who are not in the loyalty club. Let's see what I want it to say. Okay, cool. So let's switch over to non-loyalty. And that key was check in. Let's look for that key. Oops, did I spell that wrong? Let's see. Here we are. Okay, so non-loyalty. I'm going to edit this and I'm going to say as a valued customer. Oops. You can select a later checkout time. Okay, cool. And so the ability to really create custom content, we've got folks who personalize content by brand. So these are larger companies that have got multiple brands that use the same application. We've got folks who write different copy for different types of users in their application. So you can imagine a financial application that has got users who are accountants versus users who are small business owners, users who are bookkeepers versus users who are lawyers, and that's really valuable. It definitely allows your users to interact with an application that feels like it was built for their use case. Okay, I'm going to pause there. What I'd like to do is definitely talk about how cross-app consistency can be achieved. And so for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to just add this file manually, but I want to show you how customers are using Qordoba to manage strings additions across applications. So let me go into content here. I'm going to add, actually, hold on one second. I just want to make sure I understand how the keys are. Okay, cool. So we're going to go and we're going to add a key to this application. We're going to add a string. And we're going to call this kind of demo string. Qordoba is going to look to make sure that that is unique across the files in my project, right? So here's the use case. The use case is you've just gotten a great set of mocks from design, and you as the product content strategist or the copywriter are now finalizing the copy for those strings. You're able to do it in one place in Qordoba and really have that go across multiple applications. So I'm going to, for demo string, I'm going to write here, maybe let's see, kind of free towels. Just making stuff up here. We're going to add that string, and I'm going to go in and free towels. There we are. And I can now adjust this for folks who are not in the loyalty club, right? Because only folks in the loyalty club are going to get free towels. And I'm just going to call this low cost towels. And clearly I'm making things up here. And at the next build, this is now a string that my engineers have. They didn't have to add it to the resource file. They will have to reference it in source code, but they didn't have to create the key and they didn't have to create the value. And you now control what the various personas actually see for that key. And so a great way to be able to enable your engineers to move faster and hopefully not break things and give you control over what the copy says in a really close to real-time way. Remember, we are part of the build process. We're not runtime, so this isn't changing what your customers see. It's a method that engineers definitely prefer. Your engineers are getting an updated set of keys and values whenever the Qordoba script in a Jenkins server or part of a CI/CD process or in GitHub pulls and gets pushed the content in Qordoba. So I'm going to pause there. Definitely would love to hear folks' questions. We've got about 15 minutes left and want to make sure we turn this into a conversation.
I will be reading the questions here, so feel free to submit them in the Q&A. It looks like we have a few here in the chat. You can also send them directly to us. So first question is, can you talk a little bit more about how different teams collaborate on the platform?
Yeah, sure. So it's a really good question because every team is just a little bit different, and so it's very hard for us to be really prescriptive about flow. I can create workflows in Qordoba. So you can see here, May's in charge of strings creation, but Steele, you could be in charge of strings creation too. You're actually not in this organization. But I can really define who on my team is allowed to do certain things and who's responsible for things like copy approvals. And the way Qordoba works is when there are new strings in Qordoba at the step, they automatically get pushed to engineers. And the latest version of that value is also what is synced. If folks on the engineering side don't want to or want to check before a production build that all copy is final, they'll make sure that that call includes a flag for what has actually completed a particular approval. So lots of different ways that you can set up a workflow. We also have plugins for Sketch in the Adobe ecosystem so that people who are customers who are mocking up states with some final copy in a design sprint do get some of that work in Qordoba, and that helps in the key generation process. So when folks are using a plugin, we'll pull in all of the text in various layers, assign keys to them. You can change the keys, certainly. You can add more because, as we know, not every state is mocked up during design. And so definitely lots of different possibilities here for workflow.
Great. A question about personas. How can I know what persona I need to create for my mobile or web application?
So that is a good question. We integrate with Adobe Target, and so we'll cover personas next time, but the ability to add personas in your overall Qordoba organization is something that we allow. And the segmentation really comes down to the user base. And most folks have thought about this via marketing. On the product side, it is definitely new, but we can definitely work with customers to look at behavior patterns and help them figure out some good ways to customize content flows.
Great. Looks like we have two questions that are pretty the same, so I'm going to put those together here. Can we use this for implementing multi-language support for application?
Yep, 100%. So my personas can be demographic, they can be behavioral, they can be geographic. And so in the same way that I've got a toggle here to different folks who are in my loyalty program and not. I can have people who are not in my loyalty program and who see my application in French, for example. So it works very parallel.
Another one here. How do you export XML?
Yep, good question. So the content is, and let me show you in settings. So the file format, that was very astute. So this is an Android application. The file format here is XML. So all the content that gets pulled as XML and sent back to your engineers as XML. Now you can pull content in one way and send it out another way. That's all part of workspace configuration and setup. And you can support multiple types of applications within the same with the same project. So let me give you an example. So that was an Android application. I'm going to add a string, an iOS strings type. I'm going to update that setting. I'm going to go back to content. And again, in production, you'd actually be doing this via a GitHub pull, but I'm going to add a new file here. And I do believe I've got, you guys are going to see all my messy files now. But let's do, oops, there we are. We're going to add this US, oops. Well, let's just do it that way. Let's do downloads. Okay, and we're going to do our English US strings. So I now have my iOS strings in Qordoba as well, and I can manage them just as I managed the Android ones. I can create a segment that gets added to both. I can edit content in a uniform way.
Question about channel node use case here. Are people using Qordoba for single changes or really large scale updates? For example, if you're going to refresh your UI versus a version launch, etc.
Oh, that's a really good question. So we definitely see both types of use cases in kind of product refreshes. We definitely see features like search and replace all be utilized. For example, here, if I wanted to change, let's pretend I wanted to change my rewards, reward, the way I called my rewards program. So let's do just our rewards points. We changed it to something else. Oh, that else actually only appears once. Let's do, okay. There we go. The ability to do that in a search and replace all action across dozens of different GitHub repositories, potentially dozens of different files, is definitely very valuable for those kinds of refreshes and rewrites. The other thing that folks find pretty valuable is the term-based feature. So the ability to say, this is how I always want to call a particular type of a feature and be able to make those changes. So is there a way to see the total universe of changes across all strings? Yes, so there is a history function. So you can do this actually via a couple of ways. So there's a little history feature that is just the latest 2 or 3 changes for a particular string in the side panel. And then there is a everything history tab that shows you across workflow steps, across personas, even across users, what is the history of changes to a particular workspace. And that workspace can be multiple files. And then you can also see the history of the actual file. And so right now you just see when I added them, what strings were new, what strings were changed, and this grows with time.
How do you make a change to something across different apps pulling from different repos?
So the stuff that Qordoba really makes easy is being able to integrate into different types of developer workflows and take changes that are made in Qordoba and update them in different resource files based on the developer workflow. And that's what takes a lot of the work out of what engineers do and make it easy for you to make changes. And so the way that we do that is really by knowing and understanding by framework type what are the syntactical ways that strings are represented, how are variables treated, and really supporting that in the Qordoba UI and making sure that strings that are added across those various frameworks make it into the file in a way that mimics how the engineer would have added it themselves.
Looks like another question about keys. Does Qordoba actually replace the strings in the source code with keys?
Do we actually replace the strings in the source code with keys? So I'm guessing you mean hard-coded content. So yes, so in the Qordoba extract tool, and again, this is running locally, so no one's source code is going anywhere. Content that we have identified as a string is definitely getting replaced with a key that we generate. Both things are totally editable, and so the engineer could decide in that process that a key that we've identified and the key that we've generated, a string that we've identified and the key that we've generated can be edited or removed. We actually don't want that to be tokenized. But yes, that is what we're doing.
Looks like we're out of time for the webinar today. Looks like there's a few more questions I have. If you guys submitted those, I will follow up with you personally to answer your questions. If you guys have any other questions, post webinar today, we'll be sending everyone here the recording. You can also feel free to send us an email. Claudia will send the email out with the contact information there. If anything comes up, you can reach back out to us.
Sounds good.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everyone.
everybody.